Yes, it is. It's wonderful to see so many people here today. I mean, we do. This is not just a technical discussion from the Hunting Community Environment Centre. We desperately need to solve this problem. It's a problem that's been left unaddressed for decades. It's a hidden problem. It's a problem that really should have been dealt with before now. But we're building some momentum, and we think that we really do have a chance that this particular government in Macquarie Street may have the courage to do something about it. But we need you. We need your community voices. So that's the purpose of today, is to reiterate the problem, show some solutions, and get the community mobilised to actually force the state government to address the problem. So I'm just going to quickly recap on some of the research that we've done in our last report. We've been working on the issue for about 3 years now, so we're pretty close to having a really good understanding of what coal ash is, how it affects Lake Macquarie, how it affects the other waterways around New South Wales that are being affected by coal ash, and as well some of the solutions to the problem. The first thing we need to know is how much coal ash there is around, and this has implications for potential industries that may crop up that we're advocating for around coal ash reuse, but it also gives us an indication of what sort of level of pollution we might be seeing coming from the coal ash. So there's about 216 million tonnes of coal ash in New South Wales. That's an enormous figure, and it's the consequence of a very, very low ash reuse rate by the power stations. Successive governments have built, operated these power stations for most of their lives. So in reality, it is a government problem, or certainly the bulk of the problem is the New South Wales government's. And the industry does have a role to play, the power station industry, and we really want those players to step up and start taking this seriously. So most of the ash, almost half of the ash is in Lake Macquarie, on the shores of Lake Macquarie, and that's a shocking statistic. So 101 million tonnes of coal ash, a hazardous waste, is sitting on the shores of Lake Macquarie in unlined and relatively poorly designed containment facilities. There's about 4.8 million tonnes of coal ash that's produced every year in this state, and only about 20% of that is reused in cement products. There are lots of reasons for that. It's historical, but the cement industry really has a lot to answer for in, resisting the reuse of more of that coal ash. So that leaves us with about 3.8 million tonnes that's dumped into unlined containment facilities in New South Wales every year. And if nothing changes, an additional 45 million tonnes is going to be produced by the power stations between now and when they retire. The result of all that coal ash is heavy metal leachate. Now, heavy metal leachate is basically dissolved metals, the metals that are inherently in coal ash. As you probably know, coal ash is a product of burning coal. Coal itself is a concentrated product of natural forest material, sort of deposited, hundreds of millions of years ago. When it's dug up and burnt, it further concentrates the metals that were inherently in those forests. And one of the things about heavy metals is that it mobilises in water. So if you have a slightly acidic environment and a lot of water, and you have coal ash, you end up with heavy metal leachate, and it's very difficult to manage the leachate because water, it trickles, it permeates through the ash, it permeates through into the groundwater, it escapes over the dams. So we really don't know how much is going to escape every year from those compounds, but we do know that 200 tonnes of metals are in that leachate that accumulates from the fly ash in New South Wales. That's an enormous amount of metal. An analogy, mercury, for example, a teaspoon of mercury can contaminate a lake. So we've got 200 million tonnes of metals that potentially may escape from these power station facilities and enter into our waterways. There's about 2,000 tonnes of metal leachate that's going to be leach every over the next 15-20 years from the ash that's produced between now and when these power stations retire. So, you know, we all may rejoice, those of us who know the impacts of coal-fired power stations on the environment, not least the climate change impacts, but the impacts on air quality, the impacts on water quality. They're ageing facilities, and their time has come. We've got alternatives now. Every day we're seeing news articles suggesting that the uptake of renewables is increasing even further. And so, you know, those dates that are currently being proposed by the power station closures are likely to be even earlier. So we might not eventually reach that 2,000 tonnes of metals that come from the leachate from those power stations between now and they retire. But it's something that really the current owners of those power stations have a responsibility to address. So just running through some toxicology, this is a bit dry, but we need to know it. I mean, one of the things is the heavy metals, there's many heavy metals in the coal ash. Some of them are more toxic than others, and some of them are more toxic to the environment than humans. We often, you know, focus on our own human health mostly, and quite rightly, we need to look after ourselves. But we often forget that the impacts are much more often on our aquatic environments. Aluminium, for example, you know, it does have some potential health impacts, but it accumulates in fish organs, and it stops them regulating salt in their bodies. So, you know, it can be very toxic to fish, much more toxic than it is to humans. Arsenic, another example, you know, it is quite toxic to humans, but it does have, you know, quite a severe effect on aquatic organisms, particularly in freshwater, and it bioaccumulates in the kidneys. It causes, you know, a number of health complaints in fish species. Cadmium, it's a carcinogen. It's very toxic to humans, but it also, at much lower concentrations, it has a very big impact on freshwater and marine animals. The concentration is much lower than it would affect humans. Copper. Copper's one of those things that we all sort of have around the house, and it's pretty benign to most humans. You know, we do need a small amount of copper for our own metabolism, but it's probably among the most toxic metals to fish. It has a significant impact on fish populations. Iron as well. Iron is quite toxic to fish and aquatic animals, not so much to humans. Lead, again, quite toxic to humans, particularly children. It has neurological impacts, but it's toxic to all aquatic biota. It accumulates mainly in the older fish, in benthic populations. Nickel, it has a slight impact on humans. It does cause skin irritations, and you can build up a tolerance to it, but it's highly toxic to fish and aquatic species. Concentration as low as 10 parts per billion. Selenium, you hear a lot about selenium, and it's quite toxic to humans. It's one of the 5 main toxic metals to humans. But it has very interesting impacts on aquatic animals, particularly fish, but birds also. It bioaccumulates about 30,000 times. So if you have 1 part per billion leaking into a lake, it can bioaccumulate in a higher order predator by 30,000 times. So that's where the problems lie, and that's where the problems lie for our aquatic environment, aquatic organisms in Lake Macquarie. What it does is it causes the offspring to be mutated. So it can kill, at a high enough dose, it can kill hatchlings, but it also can cause morphological abnormalities to 2 heads and large eyes. These smaller fish never make it to breeding age. So what you find in the examples that we find in the literature from the US is that selenium concentrations at very low, 2 parts per billion in a large body of water, can build up in the fish populations, and breeding success almost zero in some instances for some fish. Some fish are more susceptible than others. At high concentrations, all fish are going to be affected. But what happens is that over time, The adult fish, we may not notice any difference. So we're still catching the fish, they're still of normal size, but they're not breeding, there's no recruitment. So that population basically just disappears overnight one day, and everyone goes, what happened to the flathead? And it's like, well, selenium got to them. It took about 6 generations, but eventually those adults disappeared and they weren't breeding. So we hope that's not happening in Lake Macquarie, but it's quite possible that we've already lost species from Lake Macquarie. Unfortunately, most of the studies into fish populations are the ones that we catch the most, and the ones that we don't catch just get left off the research priorities. So we may well have lost many, many species from Lake Macquarie that we don't even know about. Zinc's the other thing. Zinc causes morphological changes in the fish. So all these metals that I've showed you, we find all of these around power stations, and they all have significant impacts on aquatic biota. So we've done our own testing around power stations in New South Wales, and they confirm our fears that there is, a lot of heavy metals in the surface waters around these power stations. We looked at Raring, where their main outfall is through Cookie Creek, which flows past the abandoned Myuna Bay Sport and Rec Club to the base of the system. And Raring, basically, and the EPA, they don't seem to that Crooked Creek is part of public space. They just claim that it's a discharge point. It's actually a creek. It's got native fish in it. It should have native fish in it. There's no native fish in it because of the toxicity. But this is the place where children used to play in it, and there were no warning signs, nothing. It's a hidden issue, and it's an issue that's very, very close to some of our homes, and we really need to make sure that Origin Energy is made responsible for some of these issues. So we also tested near Bales Point. They've got an ash dam that basically flows pretty much straight into Mannering Bay. It's a small estuary that's in southern Lake Macquarie. And we've been told, nobody fishes in Mannering Bay, so it's okay, we can put it all we like. But it's not, it's open to Lake Macquarie, so it's a significant point source of pollution for the rest of the lake. And the EPA, unfortunately, don't regulate leachate. So they don't regulate the chemicals that just pass through the ash dam and into the lake and through the groundwater. They only regulate discharge, so active discharge. So the point that we've found, these high concentrations that I'll show you in a minute from Bales Point, flow out of the ash dam into a creek and then into the lake. Because it's not active discharge, the EPA can't regulate it. And these are some of the problems we have with current regulation of pollution in New South Wales. It's just not adequate to deal with the problem. So these are some of the concentrations. As you can see, Bales Point is somewhat worse than Eraring. Eraring do a better job. Their ash management is better. They use less water with the ash transport than Bales Point do. It's a relatively more modern facility. So, there are some... We've had our Origin Energy on the back a little bit. They are doing a better job than Bales Point. It's not saying a great deal because there's still significant concentrations of heavy metals coming out of this source. But if you look at on those right columns of Bales Point, arsenic at that point where I showed you previously, 43 parts per million. That's 4-5 times the drinking water guidelines and significantly above ANZAC recommendations. Boron, copper's above ANZAC recommendations, iron's very high, manganese is very high, nickel, selenium and zinc. All at these facilities, every time we go there, they vary somewhat in concentrations, but it's always above the ANZAC guidelines, which are the guidelines that are supposed to guide our pollution regulators to regulate pollution within those bounds, and they don't. So one of the big pieces of work we did over the last couple of years is sediment core samples, and we took several. Unfortunately, some of the cores weren't appropriate because there was some flux. There was obviously a more high energy environment, so the sediment hadn't been laid down sequentially. But in Mannering Bay, which is a relatively low energy environment, we did get quite a good core, a 30 centimetre core, and we had ANSTO analyse it with lead-210 dating. So they went through and analysed the core at the areas and gave us a sequential dates. So that's basically along the x-axis at the bottom of the dates that ANSTO identified for us. And then at those dates, we took a small sample at the core, of the core, and had them analysed by some colleagues at the ANU who have been working very closely with us, and they identified a significant uptick in the amount of metals in that sediment. The black line there is when Vales Point A was first built in 1962. That's when ash started to be dumped at that Vales Point site. And the results basically are cadmium concentrations have increased by a factor of 15 in Mannering Bay since the power station ash dam was built. Copper has increased by a factor of 12, zinc by 10, selenium by 8 to 10, lead by 4, manganese by 3, arsenic by 2, and iron by 2. So these are direct consequences of the power station dumping ash dam in an unlined containment facility. So one of the recent pieces of work we're working on now with the Australian Museum is identifying metals in birds. So we wanted to find out, are these metals actually, we do know that they're in fish in Lake Macquarie, but are they going further? Are they bioaccumulating up the food chain? And to our very sad realisation, they are. Lake Macquarie is not as bad as Lake Liddell. Lake Liddell is probably one of the most toxic environments you want to be if you're a bird. 100% of the birds there had metal concentrations in their feathers that were above the identified health threshold. So they are having an impact on either their individual health or on their population viability because their breeding success is going to be diminished. But Lake Macquarie, not that much better. About 60% of the samples that we found from water birds had concentrations above those thresholds. We found it in different areas. I mean, obviously birds move around, so this isn't necessarily an indication of where the pollution might be. But Whitehead's Lagoon was quite bad. It had some very high concentrations of cadmium. Lake Araring was quite bad. Very high concentration of cadmium in one of the bird feathers there. And one of that particular bird feather had very high concentration of mercury as well, which is very, very impactful on birds. And some of the concentrations, the lead, for example, one of the concentrations of one of the birds we found in Waimea Bay was 190 parts per billion, which is 4 parts per million is the threshold for health impacts for birds. We did have a concentration of 190, so that bird may be very, very sick, or at least it's not breeding. So that's basically it. Sorry to bore you with such technical details, but I'll hand you over to. No, I won't do any handing. Thank you very much.
Off we go. I reckon you can stay there for now. At the end of this, we'll come up and take questions from the floor. So thanks for that, Paul. It is highly technical, but I think people get the understanding. Can I just say, and I'm sure Paul would agree, this is not about sunset power, it's not about origin energy, it's about the fact that this problem is there and we've got to find a solution to it. These power stations were built and operated for most of their life by the New South Wales government under various political persuasions. So it's not about whether it's Labor, Liberal, Origin, Sunset. The fact is the problem is there, and I think Paul's showed the complexity of that. Further talking to that particular issue is Dr. Ed Wright. So Ian, you're listed here as a water quality expert from Western Sydney University. Ian teaches and conducts research at Western Sydney University in water science and environmental management. He has worked as a scientist with the water industry for more than 25 years and still consults for the industry. His research includes freshwater ecology, water chemistry and water pollution. Has a long-standing interest in the impact of urban development and coal mine waste on water quality and the ecology of streams and rivers. So Ian, thank you for being here today. Ian.
Thank you very much for the welcome, and lovely to see everyone. This is actually the first meeting I've had in person, not on Zoom, for over a year. So that's got some challenges. You get annoying. I can't mute you. This is great. I love doing environmental science, working on problems with the community. So this brings a joy to me to see you all here. And I really like your sentiment there, Greg. It's not anti-coal or anti-industry or anti-government. I wish we had bipartisanship on every level here. I don't want to seek any political advantage. Private, public, who cares? This is a major problem. So I'll tell you a bit about my background. I first want you to have a little bit of sympathy for me because I'm from Sydney, I'm a refugee. This is one of the most spectacular estuaries in Australia. It's got enormous natural history. I can feel that cultural history, and thank you for the welcome to country. I think I walked over a shell mentioned earlier, walking around the shoreline. And in terms of its recent history, this was one of the most important World War II sites protecting Australia. I can just about hear those Catalinas roaring across from RAF mines, with many people that never came home. It was said that the Spitfire, what the Spitfire was to Britain, the Catalina was to Australia. But I mean, everyone knows that. But for me, this is the country I love. This is the Blue Mountains on the left. That's up in the Gross River, Blue Mountains National Park. Highly protected. National Park, declared wild river, and a wilderness area. It's also part of the World Heritage Area. But at the top right, a coal mine shut down after operating for about 80 years. That's called the Canyon Coal Mine. It shut on Anzac Day 1997. And the water that thunders out of that today, I was there just a few months ago, is still contaminated. And that contamination goes down into, look at that smiling idiot, that goes down into the Gross River in this highly protected area. The Australian government, federal, state, has said we will protect this because it's got international values. Do you know how much money was spent on rehabilitation of that pollution? Absolutely nothing. Because when the mine shut, that was an important employer for Lithgow, they were scraping up to pay the mine workers, as they should, but nothing was left. And that problem is serious, and my message is solve it while the industry is active. Next slide, please. So the sort of work I do, hold the mic up, okay. The sort of work I do, I look at water chemistry, so I take meters out into the field, I measure water quality, I fill bottles. The work done by the Hunter Environment Group, Paul and Joe in particular, is superb. And it fills a hole that to me should be done by government, but we can't wait for that forever. What they've done is superb. I've done that looking at coal mines, and that is me in 1989. Note the fashion combination: gumboots, flannelette shirt, acid wash jeans. For anyone under 30, what an irresistible combination. Sadly, it wasn't for anyone but me. But what I'm doing, thanks for the 2 more clicks, I'm looking at the aquatic life living in a creek, and this is up in the Blue Mountains. Top right, stone fly. These things are about as big as your fingernail, or your smallest finger. Stonefly, mayfly, caddisfly. They live 100% of their life in the waterways, and they reflect the water quality conditions. And if there's pollution at any point, they're gone. And just around the corner, halfway between Bathurst and Lithgow, is the Sunny Corner mining area. It was silver, gold and antimony. And they shut down in the 1920s, and that spoil, there's no plants growing there for a very good reason, and that is because it's too toxic. The goodness has been taken out, and the pollution has been left. 1 more click, please. And the still drainage coming out of those mines after 100